This podcast is brought to you by Podcast Nation.
You have to be sort of obsessed with what you're talking about. It's not just turning on a mic and pressing go. It might seem like it to the listener, which is an art, but behind the scenes, there's a ton of prep, a ton of research, a ton of creativity that has to go in before you even start recording. And if you're not really obsessed with whatever that topic is, you're going to burn out and you're not going to be able to continue.
Welcome to Officially Influenced. I'm your host, Clio de la Llave, founder of Bouge Media and Podcast Nation. This podcast is for creators looking to amplify their message. We're pulling back the curtain on an often mysterious industry to share the insights you need to grow your brand. Let's get into it. Today, I have Nadine Robinson back on Officially Influenced. For anyone who missed our first episode together, Nadine is my business partner at Bouge Media and Podcast Nation. And today we're diving into the world of podcasting, what it actually takes to start a show, grow it, and more importantly, build something that matters. Because the truth is, not everyone needs a podcast. In fact, a couple of Christmases ago, we sent our podcasters sweatshirts that said exactly that. Not everyone needs a podcast. And while it was a bit tongue-in-cheek, it really reflects the core philosophy we bring to every show that we work on. Before anyone decides to hit record, there are a few questions that we always ask. Are you adding real value to your listener? Are you clear on your subject and willing to be intentional and niche? And can you actually stand out in a space that's more crowded than ever? Because today going broad just doesn't cut it. So the show that wins are the ones that go deep, stay consistent, and truly understand their audience. So in this episode, we're breaking all of that down. From what's happening in the podcast industry right now, to how we evaluate new shows, to what really defines influenced beyond just downloads. If you've ever thought about starting a podcast, or you already have one and want to take it to the next level, well, this episode is for you. Let's get into it. Nadine, it is good to have you back on Officially Influenced. So in case you missed our first episode, Nadine is my amazing business partner at Bouge Media and Podcast Nation. And today I'm excited to dive into the podcast world. So this is really an episode for anyone that's looking to start a podcast. Okay, so a couple of Christmases ago, we sent our podcasters sweatshirts that said, not everyone needs a podcast. And yet here we are, we're starting our own podcast. But the message behind that gift really sums up two things that we always ask anyone thinking about starting a show. One is, are you adding real value for your listeners? And we think we will
Hopefully.
be. Yeah,
hopefully. Sorry if we don't.
And two is find your niche and stick with it, because today there are so many podcasts. So the broader you go, the harder it is to break through. So first of all, welcome back.
Thank you.
Nadine. Are you ready to talk all things podcast?
I love it.
Okay. So maybe let's dive more into why those two things are important to us. And then I want to take it back in terms of like, I'm almost going to pretend like I'm coming to Podcast Nation. I'm looking to start a podcast. And then if you can walk us through what that experience looks like and what you need as a podcaster.
Great.
Can you genuinely add value to your listeners? Why is that so important?
If you are trying to just copy what someone else has done successfully, you're going to not come across as authentic and you're going to burn out. You have to be sort of obsessed with what you're talking about. And like you said, there's a million podcasts out there right now. You have to think of, what am I incredibly passionate to speak about, to research? It's not just turning on a mic and pressing go. I mean, sometimes it is, but I can't think of a single one of our shows that actually does that. It might seem like it to the listener, which is an art, but behind the scenes, there's a ton of prep, a ton of research, a ton of creativity that has to go in before you even start recording. And if you're not really obsessed with whatever that topic is, you're going to burn out and you're not going to be able to continue.
And then on that note, the second point is find your niche and stick with it. So obviously you want to be passionate about what you're talking about. How niche are we talking here?
Niche enough that there's not another ton of shows out there doing the exact same thing, but not so niche that there's no audience for it. So if you're going to I mean, you know what? If you want to do a really, really niche podcast that there's going to be a small audience for, but it's needed in the space and you're passionate about it and you're doing it for maybe personal reasons or it's adding some value to your existing community, whatever that is, do it. Great. No problem. Just know that the commercial value of that podcast is going to be limited because you need a certain number of listeners before you can start really monetizing in any significant way. So you have to think about that when you're going into it too, is are you okay with this just being a passion project or potentially just being a passion project? Or is your goal to, build a business out of this podcast?
An example that I just wanted to share, even though we work with him on the Bouge Media side, not on the influencer side, but he has a YouTube. His name is Tyler. And on Instagram, he is called Potato Ty. He's a potato farmer here actually in British Columbia. And he essentially shares content of his life on the farm and content about potato farming, and that's like essentially it. But he found something that people are so interested in. He is obviously creating his content very well and knows what he's doing. But like you said, there's a broad enough audience.
Everyone loves potatoes.
Everyone loves potatoes.
We all eat potatoes.
You can be niche, but it really does appeal to the masses. So anyways, not a podcast example, but I love that one.
He is a great example because I would never, if someone had come to me and tried to sell me on that idea, I probably would be skeptical that would have legs, to be honest.
Same.
But he's killed it.
Yeah.
He's amazing. But I think that the key is he started it because he was passionate about it. He didn't start it to make money, to make a business out of it. He's a potato farmer and he's really passionate about people knowing what that looks like.
I think he had 25 million views on his YouTube last month.
It's crazy.
Yes. I mean, we love potatoes. Okay. So let's say now I'm looking to start a podcast. Can you walk through the steps of what that looks like and essentially what you should be starting off with?
I would say number one is find your niche, which you already mentioned. Be really clear what your concept is. Think about, do you want to have guests? Do you want it to be solo? Do you want some other sort of format? Be really clear of what your message is and why you're doing this project. Is it because you want to connect with your community? Is it because you see something missing in the marketplace? Is it because you think that there's potential to make a lot of revenue from it, which is, all of those are relevant and that you can have, and it can be all of the above, but be really clear on what your purpose is, what your message is, what your concept is, and be ready to work your butt off. It is so much work. And I also think that you should be ready to handle everything on your own in the beginning. That doesn't mean that you can't eventually have team members that help you with certain aspects or a network that helps with certain aspects. I would say the most successful podcasters that we work with do everything on their own in the beginning, at least. You never understand the art and the craft of it in the same way if you immediately, just farm out editing and farm out. I mean, you can eventually do that. Absolutely. But also know how to do it yourself, because then you become a better podcaster. You understand what's possible in editing. You understand what's possible in the production side. I think it really makes your goals reasonable, your content more on point.
It makes a lot of sense. And I think that same example probably applies to so many different things when you're starting a business. You are starting your own business. It's a brand, right?
Absolutely. And I think that for even if you have a really big budget, let's say you're already very successful and you have the budget to, farm out all aspects of a show, you can absolutely, maybe certain pieces because, you want to have a really high quality. But be ready to get your hands dirty yourself. And that means from concept development to actual production to distribution to marketing, really know your craft yourself.
All amazing advice. One thing I will say that has really helped me with this podcast is, yes, understanding your niche and messaging. And also for us, we were very clear on who our listener was. And that has helped me so much. Okay, what will our listener find valuable? And I think that's another good one to be very clear on.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so now we have our topic. We're ready to work hard. We're going to do it all. Then what's next?
I mean, I think you just have to start. I think you have to be ready to put yourself out there, be ready to listen to your the feedback from your audience, be obsessed with your own analytics, what's doing well, what's not. You can go into your Apple Podcast Connect and see when listeners drop off. Pay attention to what were you talking about then? Certain episodes might do better than other ones. Why? What was the structure? What was the guest? What was the approach to the subject matter? Just really pay attention to all of those details because you're going to learn from it. And, people are busy and listeners are busy. And if you create value for them, whether that's entertaining them or teaching them something new, whatever that value is that you're adding to them, they will come back and listen again. As soon as you're not adding value in whatever way that is, they're going to move on to something else because there's a lot of other podcasts out there that are great shows and it is really competitive.
It's a very competitive space and you just have to know that because again, that's why you want to do a good job because you have to find how can you break through that noise and what's going to make someone come back to your podcast.
Yeah.
I also think too, being very intentional when launching, giving yourself a bit of a runway. It's exciting. You want to put it out there, you want to launch, but they haven't recorded enough podcasts, then eventually it kind of bottles up and then it becomes stressful and then it's not as enjoyable. So another thing I think we recommend is like get on the mic, record, practice, and then try to get like a good 6 to 7 episodes under your belt. If your content isn't super timely, I think that just like relieves a little bit of pressure and it gives you a bit more runway, which is nice.
Yes.
And I think we won't go over it today, but I think we should do a full episode on what it looks like to like do a proper launch and because that's I feel like that's enough content for an episode, but just being very intentional of how to release it, teasing it, tapping into your network to really help push the message and doing things like trying to get as many reviews as possible right off the bat. Like all of those things can be very helpful and also how to really try to trigger the algorithm so that it's in your favor.
Yes, absolutely. You want to be able to promote your podcast. You might create the best podcast in the world, but if no one ever knows about it, then it doesn't do you any good. It doesn't do anyone else any good. So be ready to your point, ready to promote it. And the best place to promote your podcast is other podcasts. Be ready to guest on other shows, push yourself in the space. Your point about, having 6 to 7 recorded is great. We do often, as long as like, as you said, it's not super timely content. Have a good bank. It's really stressful when you don't, guests can cancel. You could get sick. Something can come up. And if you have the pressure of having to record because there's an episode that has to come out the next day and it's not ideal, then it's just not going to be a very fun situation. So give yourself that buffer.
You just talked about guests. So a lot of podcasts obviously have guests. What is your thought around doing solo or with like your co-host or interjecting guests in like your episode strategy?
I mean, it really depends on the show. Some shows having a great guest for every episode is kind of a big piece of the content because it might be something that's educational and you're sharing experts on your podcast and you're bringing in those expert testimonials. But I would say it's a tough strategy because you're relying so much on these dream guests that you might have on your target list to say yes. And these people are usually very busy people, the people that you want on your podcast. So you're kind of at the mercy of other people. So it's a tough strategy. The other piece of it is you don't know the chemistry that you're going to have with those guests unless you personally know all of them, which, eventually you'll run out of your personal contacts and you'll have to move on to people you probably don't know. And someone might be brilliant, but it's hard to have a conversation with them for whatever reason. And so then, you don't want to be the person that records an episode and then doesn't put it out because they've spent the time recording with you. So it is tough, but it's right for some podcasts for sure. I prefer a strategy that is much more host focused. So whether that's you with a co-host is usually the easier approach because you can actually talk to someone. It's hard to sit on a mic by yourself and just talk. Some people can do it incredibly well. It takes usually a lot of practice and usually a pretty special talent to be able to pull that off on a weekly basis. So I love a good co-host situation where, 2 people, sometimes 3, kind of commit to this project together and it really comes to life and you rely on your relationship, your natural banter, and you can explore lots of different topics with that one other person and maybe bring in a guest occasionally when it makes sense, when it's somebody that you both really connect with and it feels really genuine. So I would say kind of all of the above, but I think the simplest is a co-host.
Yeah. And you know what? Going simple when it comes to having a podcast doesn't mean it's the easy way out. It just means it's like realistic. It keeps it exciting. And I think another point to that is like that you made is as more of like the creative type of people, it doesn't come as naturally. I know for me, it doesn't in terms of like reading the analytics. And I think that's something that is so important and that really also tells you what your audience wants. And the reason I bring this up is because we have noticed with a lot of our shows that a lot of times when they have the format where they have a guest, their solo episodes tends to perform the best. And I think something that's really important for people to keep in mind is the reason that the top podcasts are so successful is because people are really connecting with them as people. Like they feel like they are their best friend. Yeah, it's great to have other people that they host and you can extract the value. But at the end of the day, they're invested in the podcast host. They're the ones that they're listening to every single week.
And that's what you want. You want your listeners to want to listen to you no matter who you have on. It's a tough strategy to have a podcast where people pick and choose whether they listen or not based on who you have on your show. You want them to want you first and foremost.
Okay, so hopefully that gives like a good understanding of what it takes to like really get started. And at what point would you say that someone should look into joining a network?
I mean, most networks, I think, I mean, I haven't audited this recently, but until you're hitting about 10,000 downloads an episode, you might be able to get some interest if you're showing like some good growth trajectory before then. But that's when networks can really start being able to sell ads effectively. Most networks, I'm taking the assumption that, we're talking about networks that are ad sales based. There are obviously podcast production companies that will take on any show at any size and just help with actual production, but then you're going to be paying out of pocket for that. If you're looking for a network to sell your ads and maybe take on some of the production work, then you're going to be wanting to really aim for that 10,000 downloads per episode benchmark, because that's when brands start getting really interested.
And so what does that look like? If I come to you and I want to be part of the Podcast Nation network, I have 15,000 downloads.
Great.
And I am loving doing the editing myself. I'm obviously recording, but I really want help with sales and distribution. How does that work?
Well, the way that we structure our agreements is that it's all based on what we're doing for you. So it's a revenue share structure based, and we're selling your ads, we're monetizing your show. We have to have the exclusive rights to monetize your show. And then depending on what we're doing, we'll take more or less of a percentage. So if we're doing less for you, we'll take less of a percentage of that ad revenue. If we're doing more for you, we'll take more of a percentage. And we, are really transparent with those calculations in terms of revenue projections of like what you can expect to make from your show and what percentage we would take from that based on, the service that we're providing. So it's usually a bit customized. Just a straight sales contract is usually pretty simple because we're just, selling ads for your show and we're not investing in the production. Where it gets a little bit more customized is when a show needs, it might be production support. It might be they need help with guest booking. They might need help with social media content. They might want to rebrand, various different pieces of kind of the podcast puzzle. And so we usually customize based on what a show actually needs and structure it that way.
Okay, so at Podcast Nation, we get quite a few submissions of both new and existing podcasts that are interested in potentially joining the Podcast Nation network. How do you audit a podcast, and what do you look for in order to want to bring them on as one of our shows?
The first thing we'd look at is the content type. So we really specialize in working with shows that have generally a female millennial listener demographic. That can be various categories. A millennial female listens to a lot of different types of podcasts, but that is usually the shows that are best suited to work with us. So that would be kind of the first thing we look at, US based audience. And then the second thing we would look at is the analytics, just because there is no point in not being transparent that if you're not hitting certain thresholds, we just won't be effective in selling your ads, even if we love your show and love you and think everything's great. If you're just a little bit too early for significant ad sales, we just won't have that much success, and we want to be really transparent with that piece of it. And then the next thing we would do is usually that's done an email first, and if everything looks like, hey, this could be actually a really good partnership, we would set up a call and actually just kind of see how our relationship is and how, if you seem to like our team, if our team really connects with you and what you're working on, it is really a relationship as well. You're going to be speaking with this team day in and day out for hopefully a long period of time. It's, you can hop around networks here and there, but people don't usually want to. They want to have a team that really gets to know their mission and their content and help them grow. And so you want to be really careful with, making sure that it's a good like relational fit as well.
Are there some key signals of influence beyond the number of downloads where you can really see like a trend and that people are really eating up that type of content? Yeah.
Well, if a podcast has a YouTube component, the comment section in YouTube, I actually think can say a lot about a show. So maybe they're a pretty new show and they only have, a few thousand views on their YouTube, but the comment section is on fire. I think that says a lot that people are really engaging with their content and it's going to grow. Spotify also has a comment section, but I don't think a lot of Spotify listeners actually use the comment section. So I don't think it's as useful, but I think the YouTube, the creator's social media account as well, how much engagement their podcast type posts get on their social. If they've gone on a bunch of other podcasts, if like the podcast industry in general is interested in that person and they've been able to, book themselves or someone's been able to book them on other shows as a guest, I think that says a lot as well.
And it's interesting because one thing that we do see is that your social media following doesn't correlate in terms of like the number of downloads. Someone can have a really high social media following, but maybe their followers are not podcast listeners. Mm-hmm. However, I mean, that is such an amazing launch pad, and using that to try to convert those people into podcast listeners. And, we do work with some creators that they maybe are a bit embarrassed of putting it on, or, they're just not as consistent. But if you're willing and just like, again, look at the analytics, see what kind of content you're putting out from your podcast that resonates with your followers, and do more of that and really help your podcast grow with tapping into the audience that already knows and loves you.
Yes. And I would say one thing that I think have told every one of our shows, or we say it often, I probably am a bit of a broken record, is don't just put clips on your social. Get on your social and actually talk to your audience about what you're doing. There's so much content out there these days. Seeing a podcast clip, it's hard to differentiate yourself necessarily and really communicate your message and what your show's about in a 30-second clip. But if you get on and you talk about like, hey, I'm so excited for you guys to hear this episode tomorrow. I talked to this expert and we talked about A, B, and C, or there was this hilarious moment or whatever it is, or you guys have been asking me about this and I'm talking about it tomorrow on the podcast. Actually just talk to your audience on Instagram stories or on TikTok or whatever it may be, and make it part of your content all the time.
Yeah.
I think it makes it so much more authentic.
Yeah. Like you recorded that podcast, even right after, just get on your phone and just summarize what you talked about. And that is so effective.
Yeah. That's a great idea. Just get on there right even after you record saying, I just recorded. I don't know when it's going to come out, but like you guys have to hear this conversation. It was amazing. I learned so much, or whatever that is, but just be ready to like speak authentically about your work. Yeah. And also then it goes back to the point of, if you don't launch a podcast unless you're incredibly excited about having a podcast. So if you're not excited about telling people about it, then maybe think twice about actually having that show, because it's going to be hard to grow if you're not comfortable promoting it, essentially.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so I have a round of rapid fire questions.
Okay.
Before we dive into it, we obviously, like we said, like we're doing this so that this is helpful and valuable information for you. So we would love for you guys to comment on the comment section. And if you have more questions about this topic or what else you want to learn about, then we would love for you to give us that insight so that we can help you. Okay. Rapid fire questions. What's the first podcast you listen to in the morning?
Okay. Well, it used to be The Daily, the New York Times, The Daily. It's great, nice and quick. But recently I've actually started something new where I've tried to listen to an episode of like one of our shows instead. I can't listen to like every episode of every show that we produce. So I try to switch it up just so I can stay in tune with our shows. And they're all so good.
And which one was this morning?
This morning actually was so great. If you haven't listened yet, our podcast is called Before We Go, and it's a narrative docuseries that we produce in conjunction with Shoshana Unkeliter. She's the founder of End Well, which is a nonprofit all to do with death and dying, which sounds like a little bit of a depressing topic, but it's so beautiful and it really explores mortality. And their episode this morning that just came out was all about psilocybin therapy for cancer patients. And it was just absolutely beautiful.
So it's a must listen.
Must listen.
Okay, that'll be my
Must
podcast on
listen.
the way home.
Yes.
A podcast episode that recently changed your perspective.
Oh, well, I probably would have said that one for sure, but I'll give you a different answer. We just brought on another, not to talk about all of our podcasts, but another podcast called Overthink, and it's by two philosophy professors, and they're incredibly smart, and they explore a different topic each week. And I listened to one episode about femininity, and they talked about like modern femininity and like the trad wife trend, which is big on social right now. And I thought it was really interesting. And it's like a way to like kind of get a philosophy perspective without actually like going to school for philosophy.
Add that one to the list
There you
too.
go.
I wish we had more hours in the day to just, so we could just listen to
it's my
podcasts.
favorite part of the work we do is getting to just like listen to these incredible shows.
Who's a podcast host you find really influential right now?
I mean, I have to mention Kai Dickens. She has an independent podcast called Telepathy Tapes. She's with her network, but she independently produced her podcast. It went viral last year, and the docuseries was all about exploring telepathy in nonverbal autistic kids, and it was absolutely groundbreaking. It was unbelievable, and I think it just shined a light on members of our community that are often overlooked for not being capable of different things, and just really showing how incredibly thoughtful and intelligent, like amazing that these children are. And I think it's a story that hasn't been told before, which is amazing.
Very unique. And
yes.
I highly recommend anyone who hasn't listened. I mean, I feel like everyone has listened to it now. But if you haven't listened to the telepathy tapes, it's definitely worth it. And we were actually very excited to add her and that show to our network.
Yes, it
very
actually
special.
was shared to me by Jess, our sales director. She sent me this show before we were ever talking to Kai, and she sent it to me, and she's like, you have to listen to this podcast. And I actually think that might be the first time that Jess has ever been that forceful that I have to listen to this podcast. And she was right.
Well, actually, speaking of really quickly on influence, talk about the power of influence and word of mouth.
Absolutely.
That's why it went viral, is because everyone shared it. You know, if you can get people to like feel passionate about it and share it, I mean, that's how I get most influenced, is through friends.
Even the podcast episode I listened to this morning about psilocybin therapy and cancer patients, I sent it, I think, to 3 different people immediately after. And I don't send all of our podcast episodes to my family and friends all the time. Here's another one. Here's another one. But that one, I was like, wow, I actually think that this would be really beneficial. I sent it to our friend Erin. I sent it to my mom. I think that's how podcasting originally grew, is all word of mouth. And it still works.
Getting influenced. Okay. And lastly, what podcast do you think everyone in your industry should be listening to?
The first one that comes to mind is actually not one that's currently running right now, but when I was listening to it, I thought I need to work in podcasting because it was like having such a profound effect on me. And that was S-Town, which I think maybe I recommended to you years ago.
Yes.
As well.
I listened to it.
And it is just the most beautiful storytelling. It's kind of hard to explain what it's even about. You just kind of have to listen, and it takes you down paths you never expect to go down. But I think it's just such a work of art. And if you're working in this industry, you know, and not every podcast is that structure, right? We work with a lot of podcasts that are a simpler format, which is totally great. And it has a place for both. But I think just as like a piece of art, it was absolutely amazing.
Sold.
Okay.
If you haven't listened to S-Town, then
go back.
Another good. Well, I hope everyone has a lot of time to listen to podcasts. Well, Nadine, thank you so much for being here on today's episode. And I know that obviously you'll be back on very shortly. There's so much to get into. Anyone listening, especially if you're in the podcast space, if there's any questions or any topics that you really want Nadine to explore more so, then make sure to comment because we would love to answer all of those questions for you. Thank you, and see you again next week.